Go straight into the web app, which you can access on our website, and then you can use that to give Quirkos a try. So on the homepage of the website, you access just by clicking that web app button there, or you can go at any time to www.quirkos.com/web, and that will take you directly to that issue. And then basically what you'll see is a login page here. I've already logged into this, so I'm able to see a list of the projects which have worked with already. And I can also see in this tab here any projects that other people have created but they've shared with me. So that's part of the live collaboration feature. Sharing projects is very easy. Each of the projects that you create has this little button here, and you can just click on this to invite new people. So we've got the option to give them read only or read write access. So they do need to have a Quirkos account, even the free one they can collaborate with, and then you just put in the email address of that person and then they can collaborate on that project as well. Now you'll see once you've logged in here, there are two options here. There's the option to import an existing project. So if you've got another Quirkos project, or if you're bringing something in from another qualitative software package using the RefiQDA Exchange format, you can import a project into Quirkos Cloud. But the option that you'll probably use in a new session here is this new project button. And a project in Quirkos, you have to create a project before you can start importing your sources of data, and that keeps everything in the same place. So I'm just going to click on that new project here, ask for a project name, so I'll call this October 24 example workshop, and there's an option here to password protect the project. Now your projects are protected already with the account password that you have, but adding an extra password adds an extra layer of end-to-end encryption, so we do recommend that you use that if you've got any kind of confidential data you're working with. But I'm just going to click here on the create button, and that's going to create a new project for us to work with. So the basic layout on Quirkos is split into two halves. On the left side of the screen, this is where we're going to store the codes or themes in our project. These are represented in Quirkos by colored bubbles, which you'll see in a minute. We can create as many as we like and grow and explore as we add stuff to them. On the right side of the screen, we've got this section here which shows the text sources that we've imported. Now Quirkos is designed mostly to work with text. You can also include sources which have got pictures as well, and you can code those pictures, but it doesn't work directly with audio or video data. Now, if you do have audio video data that you would like to have a transcript for or a text representation, we do now offer a optional add-on package, which is the automated transcription system. We're quite proud of this, as you'll get 100 minutes free to try it, but we think it's pretty much the only end-to-end encrypted transcription service out there, so it has an extremely high level of data security. It's also running on our own servers, so the data is not shared with anyone else, and that system, apart from sending the data and getting it back, is entirely offline. So that data is not used to train any AI or anything like that. The whole system works offline and then sends you back the transcribed and encrypted project file. So you'll get a text representation of your audio video data straight in your project, usually within a few minutes. So there's 100 minutes free to try that. If you need any longer than that, you can add the transcription system, which will add 50 hours of transcription a month, which should be plenty for most projects. Although in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in sources that we already have from text files. In this case, I think they're mostly Word files. You can also bring in plain text files, data that you have in an Excel spreadsheet, and also PDF files. It can be very useful if you're looking at things like government reports, documents, or of course journal articles. You can bring those in and you can code them in the same way you might your own data. So I'm just going to click here on this import button, and then I'm going to go to desktop here. And what I'm going to do today is show you one of the examples that we have to basically learn qualitative research. We've created a series of example projects, which I'll show you the link for in a minute. And you can use those. They're completely open access to see some example qualitative data. So these are transcripts from qualitative interviews, semi-structured interviews that are very typical for what you might have in a common project. And you can use those to practice your qualitative research. And you can also see what coded projects look like in Quirkos. And if you've never seen coded qualitative research before, this can be really handy, because a lot of the time, even if you read the journal article of a piece of research, you'll never see the coding. You'll never see how many codes they created, what was added to them. You won't get that level of detail. But this is a completely open example. Obviously, we contacted the participants and let them know this was the deal, and these are anonymized transcripts with pseudonyms. But these allow you, this is a real qualitative research project. It allows you to see kind of behind the scenes and basically how this works when you're actually analyzing and coding qualitative data. So I'm going to select all of these Word files here, these docx files, and bring those in. Each of these represents a different interview, which has been transcribed. It says the pseudonym of the person that was interviewed and also the discipline, because this example is talking to qualitative researchers about their careers in qualitative research in academia. So I can select one or more of these just by holding down the Shift button, and I'm just going to click on the Open button now to import those sources. So there we go, we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sources which we imported, and we can see we've got one of these here, number 5, Danny, and we scroll up and down here. This is the text source of the interview. We can change the width of this text column here, and in this settings button here we can also change the size of the font, which I'm just going to do now because I know this is going to make it a little bit easier to see in the stream. Okay, that's a bit comically big, but that'll do for today, I think. Now, the other sources of text we brought in, because remember we did bring in, I think, 7 sources, are represented by these tabs here, which are in a vertical layout. And it's just like the tabs on your browser. Clicking on one of those will go between those different tabs. And if you have lots in here, this tab button here will allow you to quickly search and find sources, or filter them by other aspects of the data, like properties, which we'll go into a little bit later. If you're bringing in structured questions, so for example, if you've got something like a survey where you're asking the same questions to each person, you've got a series of open-ended questions, then there'll be another series of tabs here which will also allow you to explore question by question rather than just participant by participant. Now, obviously that can't work for this kind of data, which is a semi-structured interview. We're asking people slightly different questions in slightly different orders. So in that case, we can't kind of look question by question unless we were to manually tag that. But basically that's going to show us here how we can go through and look just at one of these sources. So I'm just going to choose one of these. Let's choose Bruce today. And we'll have a look through their text and we'll start doing a little bit of coding. But before I do that, I just want to show how we would use something that we call the properties in Quirkos. Now, in other software such as NVivo, this can be called attributes or even sometimes folders. But these are ways that we can create groups and categories and subcategories of the different sources of data that we have. Now, the properties for the different data sources are accessed by this button at the top right. That's the properties button. And clicking on that allows us to change the title. So we don't actually need the number 7 and we can change that a little. Okay, that's fine. So that allows us to change the title of the source as it's shown in the software. But here is the button here to add new properties. Clicking on this plus button here will allow us to create a new property and then values which are associated with that property. Okay, what does that mean? Well, let's have a very typical example. Most commonly, this will be used for demographic data. So it might be something numerical like age, and we would have open-ended categories for the different ages of our respondents. Maybe someone is 43, maybe someone is 32, and so on. And so if we save that, we've got this option here for age. Any of those values that we already defined, we can select here, or we can add a new one. So this person's actually 54, and bam. So we describe that person as having an age which is 54 years old. Now we can also use this for categorical data. And so another example here of demographic data might be location. So this person, I've got to admit, I don't actually remember where this person's from, but let's say they're from Edinburgh. They may also be from London. We can define as many different values as we like, and so on. We'll click save. And now with this location option here, we can choose one or more if we want to have someone belonging to multiple locations, and that will allow us to create categories and groups around these different properties. So for example, in the future, if we wanted to see everyone that was located in Edinburgh, we wanted to see results from that subset of the data, we could very easily do that. Or if we wanted to see data from everyone that's over age 54, we could very easily do that. Now we do need to manually enter these for the different sources that we have in this example. However, if you do have this data already in an Excel spreadsheet, you can import that data first. Often you will have that, particularly if they've done a survey or you've got consent forms or some other way that you're kind of keeping track of all that data. You can also use these properties to help you with things like data type. Now in this example project, we only have semi-structured interviews, but we may also have other sources of data. So there may be focus groups. We may want to have a name or ID number that identifies each person. So this was Bruce was number 7, we've changed them, sorry. And that would allow us to identify participants that had taken part in multiple interviews or had been involved in an interview in a focus group, or we had survey responses from, and then we did a follow-up interview. So that will allow us to, in an anonymous way in this case, actually find responses from the same participants, even if they were across different types of data. And one of the other things that you could use the properties for is actually to integrate your research. So if you had done a literature review, you can do a literature review in this software, and you could use the properties for things like the year of the journal, the name of the journal, or the authors. But then you can also say that in this case we've got this data type, and the data type could actually also be a journal article. And that journal article is something that we could actually code next to our data, and then we can kind of look at the connections between them. We can see what are people saying from our own data, and how does that connect with the established literature. And when we come to do the writing up and connecting to existing discourse, that becomes very easy to do because we can pull out quotes on a particular topic from our correspondence and see how that connects with what people have said in the published literature. Okay, so Anita just asked, should my guided interview questions be uploaded here for structured questions? This is primarily how I've formatted my codes. Yeah, so if you have a guided interview structure, it's something like more like a structured interview, you can actually absolutely import that in that way. In fact, it might be easier, in fact, to create something like that in a Excel spreadsheet if you don't have it in that kind of format already, and then you can very easily bring in that data with those questions for each respondent. And the best way to do this is just to make sure that you have a separate row for each respondent. So we could have something like respondent name, and then we can have question 1, question 2, and then this will be respondent 1, 2, 3, and then question 1 will be like yes, no, and so on. And you can import the data structured in this way. Now, it may be the case that if you have a transcript that looks a little bit more like one of these, you would actually basically just drag and drop the response for each question into the spreadsheet like this. So question 1, the answer goes in here. Question 2, the answer gets copied and pasted into this sheet here. And then when you import that data, you'll be able to do that filtering between those different questions, as well as looking by the respondent. I don't have an example data set to show today, which shows the data kind of formatted in that way. But this is basically the kind of template that you would use. And when you click on this import button here, add sources import, you would actually just bring in an Excel file rather than a series of different Word documents into your project. Are there any other properties that can be created or used beside demographics? Yes, absolutely. So there is no restriction to the way that you can use the properties. So you can use them for any kind of grouping or categorization that you can think of. You can use them also to kind of tag things in a source by source way. So for example, you can also use it for things like interview notes, and you may have, so you may have, for this person, who's this Caroline, this was a very difficult interview, we kept getting interrupted. And you may also include properties which are your own categorizations or different characteristics that the participants express themselves. So maybe you have a property for political leaning, or if they have there's a particular experience that you're looking to see if people have had, and if that had an effect on what they're saying. So basically, any way that you can think of basically splitting up and creating subsections from your data, you can create a property for and create groups and categories. Now I'm going to come back to this a little bit later in a minute, just to show you, once we've done a bit of coding, what some of those results would be. Hopefully that will make it a bit clearer why we're creating these properties and how that can be helpful, but I'm happy to come back to it again if that helps at that point. So let's leave the properties for now. We've created quite a lot already, but let's go back to the text. We're going to look at Bruce, won't we? And let's see how we would actually do some codes and create some coding. So let's look a little bit at the first question. Okay, so there we go. So Bruce, have you always been in research and academia, or have you got another life? Laughs. Okay, so that's the interviewer's question. So this transcript says there's int and then res for respondent. So Bruce says, no, I guess I've been in academia to varying degrees most of my professional life. It's the few odd years where I've worked outside educational institutes has really been in sort of quasi-academic capabilities, I guess, insofar as pursuing activities that I was doing at universities, research and development, I guess, application. Okay, that's one very long sentence. Okay, so let's break this up a little bit. So no, I guess I've been in academia to varying degrees most of my professional life. Okay, so there might be lots of different ways that we're wanting to code and interpret this data. There may be different approaches that we're taking. So we may be doing some kind of thematic analysis, some form of grounded theory. So that's either of those will be kind of involve creating codes on the go. Or we may be doing something like framework analysis where we've created the codes ahead of time. For this example today, we're just going to create some codes as we go, just to show how that works. But Quirkos is designed to be quite approach agnostic. So whether you're doing IPA, or you're doing classical grounded theory, or you're doing Braun and kind of approach to grounded theory, you should be able to use Quirkos quite easily for all those different approaches. So the first thing to do is I'm going to select this piece of text here, and I want to tag this as being something that some people have said about academia and also about their professional life. I'm interested in this concept of how people define what their professional life is. So I'm going to drag and drop this text onto an empty space on the left, and that's going to create a new code, which I'm going to call academia. Oops. And I've also got space here for a longer description, which I'm going to call working in academia or higher education, I guess. And so that description is very useful, particularly if you're working with others, or you get to the stage where you have lots of codes and you want to remind yourself what you mean by this in the future. And there's also the option here to choose a different color for these codes. And the colors mean that you could represent similar things with different shades of colors, because there's a slider here, so we could have academia and different things about universities represented by different shades of purple if we wanted to. So let's do that. Let's choose a kind of lilac to start. And we've got a new bubble here, which is called academia. And this text here, this first sentence, has now been added to this code for academia. It's been color coded with a highlight, and in this column here, we've got a representation here showing that that piece of text is about academia. Now, hovering our mouse over that will show us the code that that text was added to, and right-clicking will allow us to delete and remove that code from there. The code stays there now, even though it's empty. You saw it got smaller. With the undo button here, we can put that text back in that bubble, so everything has an undo redo, and you'll see that the size grows again. So the relative size of the bubbles in Quirkos represents how many extracts of text, how many highlights have been assigned to that particular code. So there are lots of different ways that we'll see how that changes in the future. But for now, let's just create a couple more codes. So actually, this same piece of text is about academia, but it's also about professional life. So I'm going to drag and drop to a separate place on the canvas, and I'm going to create a new code which is called professional life. Again, it's basically to put professional, a better description of what we mean, how we're conceptualizing professional life, and we'll choose a green color for this one. And so now we've got two codes, and you can see that this extract of text has been assigned to both of those codes. Now, the bubbles, the codes in Quirkos, you can drag and drop to move around, and you can also drag and drop onto each other. So we may decide that actually academia is a subset of professional life. So there may be other aspects of professional life. So we can right click on a new area, even if we don't have text, and create a new code, which we'll call outside academia. And drag and drop that onto professional life. And now we've got subcategories under here. So academia is a subcategory. We've also got outside academia. So anything which is not about academia, we could put in there. Okay, this is pretty limited in our categorization, but we can add more and more codes and themes as we like later on. If we decide that we don't like this categorization, we can also drag and drop the bubbles out just by pulling them back out from the professional life bubble. And now they kind of stand alone again. And remember, we can drag and drop and move these around, so we can put things which are kind of related close to each other, but not necessarily on top of each other if we don't think that they fit into a hierarchical category. So there's lots of different ways that you can play and sort with the different codes and themes in Quirkos. So let's read through a little bit more of the text, do a bit more coding. It's the odd few years where I've worked outside of educational institutions, been reading quasi-automatic capabilities. Okay, so this we can kind of drag and drop onto the outside academia bubble, and we can also put it into the academia bubble as well, because he's saying was kind of academic as well. So slight contradiction, but that works for the way that we've created these codes and categories. If you don't want to drag and drop this code, and if you're working on something like an iPad where the drag and dropping is kind of fiddly, you can also select a piece of text like this and then just click on the button to add it to that code. And if the drag and dropping is getting tedious, that can be a lot easier. And it also allows you to select a piece of text and then quickly say, okay, well, that's about all of these things. That's about academia, that's about professional life, that's working outside of academia. And now this piece of text has been very quickly added to 3 different codes. So we've added that click to code functionality, so it works a lot better on Macs and also on tablets like iPads. So you can use that also if you find that a little bit easier than dragging and dropping onto codes. And you'll see that the size of the bubble shows now, if we hover the mouse over, that academia is the code that we've used most so far. It's got 3, see the number 3 there, 3 different codes to it, and both of these I think have 2. There's also the option to turn the numbers on if you want to see that all the time. We're also trying not to quantify that too much. So I've showed you the basics of kind of coding and creating codes. The other way that we can work with this data is actually to create memos. And that means a little extract of text that we've written, so analytic text, which helps us to describe or understand something that came out of the data. And the memos column is this column here. We can click this button to make it larger. Let's pull this out while we're working with it. And to assign a memo to a bit of text, we can drag and drop that text onto this memo column here. And that will allow us to, it's basically like adding a kind of scribble in the margin or adding a post-it note that's assigned to that extract of text. So I can say, sounds like this person was basically always an academic. Sorry, apologies for my spelling. very bad at typing at the same time. It's still spelled wrong. Good. And then I can click tick when I'm done. So this is my own insight. It's tagged with my name. If we were collaborating on the project, we can see the memos which are written by different people. So you can start to have a little bit of a discussion with other people if they're working on the project about different things that somebody might mean, or when something's not clear. You can also use this memo approach if you're taking something which involves line-by-line coding. Classic example being IPA. If you're doing interpretive phenomenological analysis, you tend to, not necessarily for each sentence, but for each line or each section like this, have your own kind of written interpretation, and then use that later on to create something which is more like this kind of codes or straight onto the kind of themes. So selecting a memo will select the text which that's been created to, and then we can drag and drop that onto the canvas to create a new code. Always academic. So this may not be the best coding that we've ever done, but for now it will suffice. So there are lots of different ways to approach that code or coding. You've got that option to create your own kind of interpretation and just keep your own notes and memos as well. Well, we're talking about our own kind of analytic writing, our own analytic text. I should also mention that there's a little button in the bottom left here, which is ostensibly the built-in live chat. And again, this is super helpful if you're working in real time with other people on the same project, because you can use it to say, hey Julie, how is coding today? Or should we change academia and outside academia to something that's more specific? But you can also use it for your own log. So you could just be talking to yourself, basically, keeping a log of your, basically like an analytic diary of the decisions you've made, how you're interpreting the data, when you've made decisions to merge and split codes, and all the other things that will happen as the project kind of grows and gets bigger. So that option is there regardless of whether you're using the live collaboration features or not. And there's various different ways that you can use that to explore your own feelings and interpretations and keep a log of your project as it develops. Now, the other thing that I'll quickly mention before we go and look at some of the other ways that we can work with the data is that there's lots of ways that we can kind of explore these codes. By double clicking on the code, that will show us all the text from all the different sources, although we've only coded to Bruce so far, that we've assigned to that text. So here's everything that people have said about academia. And anywhere in Quirkos where you get these quotes, where you can see the highlights, we can see the memos that are attached to them, we can see the other codes which they've been assigned to, but we can also use these buttons here to select one or more of the quotes and then copy and paste them into wherever we might be writing up. So for example, if we now create a Word file, we can assume this is where we're writing up our text. Just by pasting in there, we'll get those quotes which were from just Bruce in this example, but about academia. So that's the real advantage to using Quirkos or any kind of qualitative software is how easy it makes it to find these quotes and then quote them with the attributes when we start going to write up. The home button will take us back to the main view. Right-clicking on any of these codes will also show us some other options. There's the overview, which is what we saw just now, which shows us all the text which is assigned to them, as well as any subcategories that might be under that code. The overlap view we'll look at in a minute. That shows us the connections between the codes. There's the option here to edit them, which allows us to change the title in any way that we want, the description, or to change the color, and then that will update through the project. The other option here, oh sorry, it's not going to like these quotes here, is it? The other option that we have here is to merge codes together. So we may see we've got this professional life and we've got academia. Maybe they're actually too similar. So let's merge those codes together. And then everything which was in academia has now been merged into that professional life code. Actually, I don't like that interpretation, so I'm going to undo that and undo the adding those different pieces of text to there. But that allows us, if we've got too many codes, which are too specific later on down the line, we can merge a bunch of them together to have a more general code or to create more general themes later on in the coding cycle, particularly if we're doing an approach that involves something like open and then axial coding. Okay, so there are other ways that we can view the codes. If you're more used to other software like NVivo or MaxQDA, where you don't have this kind of bubble view, but you have a more kind of conventional like list view, there is an option here to also get a list view. It basically just creates these kind of square lists, which you can indent to have subcategories and work in the same way. You can drag and drop or click to add codes to them, and they allow you to work in the same way. But if you prefer to have a hierarchical list rather than the bubble view, you can use that view instead. There's also different ways that you can arrange the bubbles when you start to have lots of them. This view here, we can arrange them in something like alphabetical order, in A to Z, or by the date that they were created, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different ways to visualize the canvas rather than this kind of open creative space where we can put the bubbles anywhere we like. Once you have lots of bubbles, that can become quite useful. Having said that, let's now open this project in an example where we've actually just done more coding. So rather than sit here and me doing 2 or 3 hours of coding, I'm just going to open a project where it's the same data, but we've already created a bunch more codes and we've done a lot more coding. And that will allow us to see how we can use those things like properties, and also some of the tools which allow us to visualize the data once we've done a bit more work. So I'm just going to go to projects here. Everything is auto saved, so there's no need to kind of click save at any stage. And we'll just find the journey project. I think this one. Yeah, this looks good. Okay, so this is the same project where our researcher Kathy, who actually kind of did this project, has created a lot more codes. And if we look down here, has done a lot more coding across not only these, but also kind of like her own summaries that she's made of those. So there's a lot more data now. Vulnerabilities was the kind of main project focus. People talking about the vulnerability of being a qualitative researcher in academia. And so you can see there are lots of subcategories under here. Double clicking on this bubble now will show all the other bubbles which are under here. We can see all of that text, or we can just click on one of them to see training gap. And that will just show us now all the different, across all the different sources, Jackie, Matilda, and all the different quotes about that concept of training gap. And I can code in this view as well. So if I want to split this out, that's also about self-belief. We can add it to that bubble as well. And so you've got added to that self-belief category as well. So we can code within this view as well. Clicking on the home button to go back to the main view, we can also now see that it might be quite useful to have an arranged kind of view here. So I think it's this title. Yeah, okay. So this is now in alphabetical order. So that might be quite useful. I've zoomed in quite a bit to so you can't see quite everything here, just to make it a bit bigger on the screen. But you can see all the different codes in the kind of neat grid now, if that's more useful. But again, you can use the space to put particular things close to each other, and you can use the colors to keep particular things together. And so Kathy's choices about where she's put things and how she's colored things make sense and help her get around the coding and find things a lot quicker and a lot easier. There's also a search here, so if you just want to say, oh, where's the code about gender, where's it gone, you can just start typing, oh, okay, there it is, drag and drop, okay, and add that section to the gender code. Or okay, wait, I didn't have one, okay, I should create one. So the search here is dynamic, and that really helps you find once you've got lots and lots of different codes. Now, the other thing that we'll look at now is how we can start to use some of the tools in Quirkos to visualize the connections between these different codes. So we've taken this approach here where one piece of text has been coded to lots of different things. This comment here is about the common paradigm unsurprising codes, messy journeys, it's about how people are treated, it's also about the training gap. So people can reveal a lot of different things in one particular extract. Some people saying, I was their blue-eyed girl, and when I became pregnant, my position in the eyes of the people changed with power, and so it started to make things difficult. They wanted me to do evening teaching. So it's very much about gender, it's very much about their acceptance, it's about problems, it's about how people are being treated in academia. So there's lots of different categories that we might want to have a comment like that added to, and we can do that in Quirkos. But what it can be useful is to try and look at the different things to see how often they connect. So we've got this code here. I've not looked at this before, but there was one called How People Are Treated. How is it in here? I can't remember what it was called now. How People Are Treated, purple one. Yeah, I can't see that one now. So let's go with, let's look at this unsurprising one, because this was, yeah, it was unsurprising that she got pregnant and she was treated this badly. Okay, so that's interesting. So I'm going to right click here on the unsurprising bubble, and I'm going to choose this overlap view. Now what the overlap view does is basically count each instance where a piece of text occurs and has been coded to one other text, one other code. And then that lets us see how often codes have been used together to describe one piece of text. So if we look at the overlap view for unsurprising, the thing that's most unsurprising is this vulnerabilities code, but also training gap. So these two things, the higher up they are in this view, the more of an overlap. So the more times that surprising was coded at the same time as training gap. So 10 instances where those were used together. So now on the right, this shows us all of those extracts of text. So every time we said that somebody said something that we categorize as being unsurprising, or they deemed unsurprising, and was also about training gap. We can also look at unsurprising and messy journeys, or unsurprising and self-belief. And so we can start to explore the connections between those codes. And it may reveal interesting things, like, well, why there was a training gap, but that was unsurprising to people? So that kind of implies that people kind of expected there to be a training gap in their qualitative research or qualitative training for qualitative methods, I suppose. So that's something, by going back and reading the text, and that's what Quirkos is always really trying to get you to do, will help you kind of explore whether that is a significant finding. So going back to the home view, that was the overlap view. There are a series of different tools in Quirkos that help you explore these in different ways. The next thing that I wanted to show is actually how we can use these properties. So this project's got slightly different properties to the ones we had. Location was there, we don't have age, but there's gender, discipline, other identified discipline, and a series of other ones here, how long they've been in academia, for example. But what I can do is, with this filter view here, I can start to look for just particular parts of the data. And the properties is one of the ways that we can filter that. So for example, here I could add criteria where I want to look at the location, select England, and apply that. And now this is showing me below the data, which is just from the participants who have the property where the location was England. So basically just the people that were based in England. And I can do that for any of the different properties here. So the discipline, who the interviewee was, the type of source, the type of data it was, how long they've been in academia, so anything that I can define with those properties. And so that shows me here that the code that people spoke about most with our participants who were based in England was vulnerabilities. Second biggest one was training gap. And now I can go through and I can read the results just from people who are from England. But if I zoom out a little bit here, I can also split the screen here with this button here, and we can look at another criteria side by side. So if we look at the location, I'm just going to do the same one again because I know the results for this one. For the people where the location is Australia, okay, both of these groups have vulnerabilities as the thing they talked about most. But the interesting thing is that the people in Australia didn't talk about the training gap nearly as often as the people in England. Now, there might be various different reasons to explore that and to explain that discrepancy. Maybe we just interviewed more people from England. But actually, the number of times that we use codes like vulnerabilities and unsurprising are pretty similar. This is quite a big difference. And it's one of those things where until you read in this way, so you're reading across sources, but just from people from one particular data set, you can see that for some reason in Australia, people are talking about a training gap a lot less than they are in the UK, or in England, sorry. So does that mean that Australia has better training for qualitative methods than the UK? Well, we can go through and we can read that text and we can make a decision about that as a researcher. And again, wherever we have these extracts of text here in Quirkos, we can select them and copy and paste them. So if we want to have everything which people said in Australia about training gap, we can copy and paste and put those into the Word document where we're writing up. So now we'll put in here, we'll remove these and paste in, oh, I didn't press the copy button. Paste in all the different texts that we have from the people who are based in Australia talking about their training gap. So that's really going to help us when we get to that writing up stage. We can add additional queries in here as well. So maybe we wanted to look at the people in England who were in sociology. Okay, that is Danny, possibly other people as well. So we can keep adding and getting more and more refined results. We can kind of narrow down our focus a lot here. There's also other things which we can explore here. So we might want to look, if we're working on a project with other people, who did the coding? We can compare coding between different project authors here. Who created which codes? When was the coding done? When were codes created? And this can help you kind of explore basically how codes were created through the course of the project, and to also look at the differences between how multiple participants in the project might be coding. So the query tool is a very powerful tool to explore this data. Now there are other things that we have here in Quirkos as well. We've got the word cloud functionality here if you want to do some basic kind of word association type thing. So do we want to see every time somebody used the word qualitative? We can see that just by doing a text search for that. So Bruce talked about the word qualitative the most, then Danny, and so on and so forth. And the word cloud also allows us to visualize those different connections between the codes. We can also export and explore the data in many other ways. So one of the most commonly used ones is to basically export the text back out again as coded transcripts. So if we want to share it with someone else that doesn't have the software, or we want to have a sort of appendix, we can create a word export here. That will basically give us our transcripts back out as a Word file, but with our color-coded text. Okay, let's zoom out so we can see. Yeah, and that uses basically the memo function in Word to show you who did that coding, what code it was, and when that coding was done and by who. And so that's very nice to kind of print out and take away from the computer and use to explore the data or to share back with our participants who want to do a bit of triangulation with how they sense checking of how we've interpreted that data. We can also export the data as a Excel spreadsheet. You might have noticed so far that Quirkos doesn't really have any quantitative metrics. It's a very qualitative focused piece of software. So if you want to do things like statistical analysis of is there a significant difference between how often a particular code was used between the different sources, you've got the Excel export with all of the different data sorted in lots of different ways, and this will allow you to create lots of different graphs and summaries, bring it into SPSS or R, and then run any kind of statistical testing that you want. You can also get an export of all of your chat here, so if you want to kind of export that as this kind of spreadsheet, and all the memos that we have as well, and the text that was associated with, and all of their properties as well. So that gives you lots of different ways that you can use the filters and so on in Quirkos, in Excel to sort alphabetically and so on, and then explore in lots of different ways. There's also a built-in report functionality, and this report gives you lots of other options to format and export the data. You'll see here we've got tables for all the different sources, how many codes were introduced to each one, summaries of the codes and their relationships to each other. And then we've also got text. I'll just try and zoom in a little bit. This is, sorry, very small for streaming. Then we've got graphs here of the differences between our properties. So some graph summaries of how our data was kind of split up, views of the different canvases, and then the sources of the text. And there are various different options here to sort how they are, if they're displayed by theme, if they're displayed by source, so everything a particular person said, or everything that's under a particular bubble or code. And we can choose how to sort them, whether it's by size or whether it's by the name of the quirk and so on. We can add the different properties here. We can show the format it in various different ways. Then when we're happy with how it looks, we can print it out, we can print it as a PDF, we can save it as a web page, or we can also save this report as a Word file. So that's another good way to kind of share a kind of coded project and a summary of the project with all the coded data in it as well with someone else, even if they don't have the software. So that's a basic kind of overview of what I was planning to cover today. If you're here on the live session and you want to ask any questions, or if there's anything you want me to cover, or anything that I went over too quickly and you want me to cover again, do put that in the chat, and I'll try and address that as soon as I can. If you do have any other questions, you can always reach out to us. So our email is support@quirkos.com. It's available 7 days a week. And we're happy to answer your questions, not just about the software, buying licenses and so on and so forth, but also if you've got questions about applying a particular analytic approach or particular types of data that you want to use. Yeah, all our staff are experienced qualitative researchers on the support line, so we're able to help as much as possible, making sure that you get the most out of the software, but also it's working and specific for your own guidance and your own ways of working with the data. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions for now. So if you have any other questions or you want to learn more about Quirkos, do go to the website www.quirkos.com. You can find a lot more information there. There's also lots of tutorials, those example softwares, and we've also got a free qualitative research course. We're actually doing a live session to kind of introduce that in the next few weeks. And this teaches you not just about Quirkos, but all the different aspects of getting involved and epistemology and meta issues and working with different types of data and so on. So this is very useful if you're doing qualitative research for the first time, or if there's a particular skill you want to kind of work on. So in the chat, Debbie's just asked, what's the best way to try and sort your codes when you have way too many? Okay, so this is a very common issue. So we try and provide quite a bit of space in Quirkos for your codes. Some of the other views can help. So the list view might be useful. You can just scroll up and down this, and that kind of lets you see things in a different way. You've also got the different ways of arranging this. You can put this in a kind of grid format. The dragging and dropping things on top of each other to create these nested hierarchies can be an extremely useful way to start managing those, particularly when you're going kind of from codes to themes, and those are kind of developing and becoming bigger. Just because you've put something under there, it can make coding a lot easier, particularly if you've got very basic categories like career choices. What have we got here? Trajectory, other jobs, identity. But we also might have things here like teaching, like cautionary tales, why not? We can have subcategories under here as well. So that does help keep track of all those different codes and make the working area a lot neater. But there is another way that we can also work with those different codes, and that's with what we call the groups function here. So with the groups, what we can do is basically add more than one code to one group, and we can also have codes that belong to multiple groups. So an example here might be, well, let's create a new group which we'll call teaching, and another one which we'll call research. And now what we can do is we can add any of these codes to one or more of those categories. So researching, okay, fine. So we're going to edit that and we're going to add that to the research group. Okay, so that's a code which is about research. What else do we have? Let's say reflexivity. Okay, that's mostly a consideration in research, so for now let's put that in research. What about rigor? Yeah, I guess that's probably more of a research thing than a teaching thing. Okay, my categorization is not great here. Probably you can see what I mean in a minute. Teaching, okay, good, that's teaching. Let's put that into the teaching bubble. What else do we have? I was hoping we'd have something about working with students or something. But let's also put something like advice. So advice, maybe the advice here is, there's advice about teaching, but this also contains advice about research. So let's put it in both of those groups. Okay. So now with the groups, we can turn off and on groups, and that helps us to filter this canvas. So if we just want to see, these are just the codes that we've tagged as being about teaching. So it's teaching and all these subcategories, and also this one here about advice, because we might have advice about teaching. But if we put on research as well, so now we can see things which are just about research and just about teaching. Or we can see, oh, we did that already, just the codes which are about research. Now we can also create groups, not just for kind of different categorizations, but also different stages of the process, the coding process and creating codes and themes. So we may create a group which is called codes, which is for those first kind of very inductive, very descriptive codes. We may create another group which is called themes, for those kind of broader topics that come later. And what this allows us to do is to turn off and on the visibility of the codes and the themes, but still have them in the same project. So we can create themes from our codes if we want to, but we can also, if we're just looking at those themes later on, turn off all those little codes we created at the beginning and just see the themes. Or if we wanted to go back to the beginning, turn off the themes and just look at the codes. And so the visibility of the groups, and by putting things in those groups, it gives you a non-hierarchical way to group the codes. Because obviously by dragging and dropping things on top of each other to create these hierarchical codes, a code like self-belief can only belong to the vulnerabilities code. It can't also belong to self-belief about teaching or self-belief about role and purpose, which might make sense. So the groups can be another way to organize, sort, and most importantly, change the visibility of. The filter view, again, will help you explore that. So within here, we can look at the groups and then we can see responses just from the codes which are about research. So now these here are the codes which we tagged as being about research. And now we can read all these kind of research-focused codes and not any of the others. So it does help when you start having lots and lots of codes. I think one of the other things to bear in mind is that Quirkos doesn't have any kind of hard limit to the number of codes that you can add, but it does become more and more awkward when if you were to try and have hundreds or thousands, and that is kind of deliberate to the design. My general feeling is that by the time you've got more codes than you can remember, you're probably duplicating what you're doing, or you're not able to capture all the different aspects that you want to from your research. So by limiting the number of codes, I think you're more likely to be more focused, and you're more likely to have simple codes, simple themes, which you'll use again and again, rather than having, as some people sometimes have, hundreds of codes that they've only used once. So obviously the merge function is very important at that stage for bringing things together and making sure that very quickly you don't have too many codes there. Okay, so a couple of other questions in the chat. Will the groups function show in an export report? They don't show in this report here at the moment, although we're actually adding that in the next couple of weeks, but they do show in the Excel spreadsheet. So you can filter by the groups in there as well, even on a quote-by-quote basis. Another question, can group codes be aligned to the structure questions? If so, can you give an example? Yes, you can, but that will be a manual process. So for example, I'm really sorry I don't have an example data set here for the structured questions. I'm going to try and do a webinar in the next couple of months where I focus on using the structured questions and structured data. Basically, what I would suggest you do is you may have a particular question here. So let's say question 1 is, how long have you been in academia? A very simple question that you ask to each person, but it's open-ended, so people could say a long time or not very long. How they interpret that is very important. So it's an open-ended question. And you can have responses to that, so codes. So you might have a code which is not very long, very long, that you're only going to use to interpret that code. And so you can put those two codes, not very long, a long time, into a group which is called question 1. And then that group will put together, in a non-hierarchical way if you like, all of the different responses that you've used, the different codes that you've used to code the responses just from question 1. But it may be something like, not very often, is useful for question 2, because your next question might be, how often do you get training? And not very often might be a code that you want to use again. You may want to see whether there's a commonality between how often people say they've been in academia and how much training they've had. If they say not very often to both, maybe they've not had a lot of training because they've not been in academia very long. So you may want to use some of those codes to answer multiple questions, but by saying this is a possible answer to group 1, and this is, to question 1, and this is a possible answer to question 2, you could use those groups to have codes that belong to more than one question, which is indicated by the groups. I'm sorry, these things are very difficult to sometimes kind of verbally describe, and there's so many different kinds of language and words that you can use to categorize codes and themes and groups and themes and so on. So I'm sorry if that's not very clear. I am going to try and do a more structured example version of this webinar in the next few months. So do keep an eye on social media. If you subscribe to our channel, you'll get a notification when we've got live streams coming up. And that way you don't have to watch it, obviously, but if it's going to be useful to you, then we can do that as well. So far that's the last question I have. Again, if you've got any other questions, do feel free to email us. It's support@quirkos.com. Sorry, I thought I put it in there. You can always get in touch with us also on social media. We're on LinkedIn and Mastodon, no longer on Twitter for obvious reasons. But anyway you want to reach out to us, you can also call us during UK office hours. You can find all our contact details on the website as well. And any other questions that you want to have, please do get in touch. We're always here to help you. So hopefully the session was useful today. If you need more detail or anything, or want to go over everything, you can watch this stream again, but also check out the other videos on our channel. Some of them go through more specific aspects, for example, structured questions, and some of them also focus on particular things, like, for example, difference between codes and themes, doing semi-structured interviews, and we've got new videos coming out on our channel all the time. So thanks so much. Please give Quirkos a try, and yeah, looking forward to talking with any of you if you've got any queries in the future. Thanks so much for coming along today.